and I sat down to play for the first time, and he said, "Okay, now you have to create a character." And I said, "Great, I'll be Luke Skywalker." He's like, "No. Like that's not like you need to make a character." And I said, "Okay, Luke Skywalker." And he's like, "No, you can't be Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker is Luke Skywalker." I said, "Okay, well, I'll be Han Solo." He's like, "No, you're completely not getting it. You have to create somebody new."
Yeah.
And when I remember there was this realization that hit me of like, oh, so I have to create somebody new in this universe and have completely different stories than what took place in the films. And that's when I got hooked. I'm like, wow, I don't have to wait for George Lucas to make any more movies. I don't have to wait for anybody to write any more books. Like these are our Star Wars stories. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Super Story Podcast. I am here with my oldest, dearest friend, Jeff Ratliff, who I affectionately call Ffej. We met, I was probably eighth grade, ninth grade, probably eighth grade. Yep. In what Mrs. Castle's geometry class, I remember. So we've been friends a long time, and which is great because I don't think I'm friends with anybody else back from where I'm from or when we went to school with, and other than a Facebook acquaintance, Ffej is the one who stuck. So super happy to have him on. And you may be thinking like, where's Brad? Where's Travis? Well, they're doing some holiday things, and Ffej being a father and a husband and a pastor has nothing else to do on Christmas weekend. So he decided to join me on the Super Story Podcast. But really, the main reason that I wanted to have Ffej on the Super Story Podcast was simply because we're going to talk about Star Wars today, and I don't want to talk about Star Wars with industry people. I don't want to talk about Star Wars with smart people who have insights into all the machinations of all the professional entertainment aspects of Star Wars. I want to talk about Star Wars with another true fan of Star Wars and somebody that bonded with me over Star Wars a zillion years ago, and to have sort of that real Star Wars conversation. And Ffej, I couldn't think of anybody else that would fit that bill other than you. It's interesting because going way back to high school, some of my earliest memories with you was standing in line for episode 1 outside of Movies 10 Cinemark, movie theater in Ashland, Kentucky. For an entire day to get those episode 1 tickets, and we just have a lot of seminal Star Wars memories together. But primarily, it was by playing the Star Wars role-playing game, Weston Games Star Wars RPG. So, yes. Is that what you recall our comic book origin story? Was sort of built with Miss Castle's geometry class, and somehow from there, my memory just jumps into Weston Games Star Wars D6 system RPG.
I remember we met when I was a freshman, and Josh Reynolds and I would sit in the library at lunch and play Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
And then Josh knew you because you lived pretty close to Pop Collins. Yep. I don't know if you rode the same bus or whatever. Right. And he was like, we should invite this Houston guy, and you would come and you would play Dungeons and Dragons, and you would question all of the rules. So, which is probably served you well over your lifetime, because you were immediately a rule.
That's
questioner.
it.
So yeah, I think, and then all of us realized pretty quickly that back then the old TSR Advanced Dungeons and Dragons system was kind of not a very good role-playing game system.
Not a good role-playing game.
And overly complicated. And we just somehow ended up falling into playing Star Wars over the years. Yeah. So that's how I remember our comic book origin story. For sure.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I attribute 90% of my storytelling ability as a professional to the thousands of hours of playing role-playing games as a teenager. And what I hated about the TSR Dungeons and Dragons system was that I felt that the rules were getting in the way of the story, and
Yes.
that I wanted just to progress the story along, but there were so many mechanics and so many roles, and you had to read 13 charts for every single role, that it just, I don't know, it was boring to me. And what I loved about getting into our Star Wars role playing game, that we could really just focus on the story because that D6 system was so easy. I really encourage people to really pick up that tabletop RPG, not like a video game RPG. I talk to a lot of film students now, Ffej, that when I mention RPG,
They
they
think of
think,
video games.
yes, they think of
Yeah.
video games, right? But I'm like, no,
Yeah.
Dyson pencils, right? Like, and and like they don't even know what that means, right? And so I feel like it's becoming a lost art. But man, we had like we had such a seminal time in our life, like that took place just, 3:30 in the morning,
Yep.
having these epic Star Wars adventures, in a role playing game.
I remember when the Timothy Zahn, the first book came out.
Sure.
I went to Little Professor and bought
Hmm.
in Russell, Kentucky, and bought the Heir to the Empire in
Right.
hardback. I still have it somewhere.
Yeah.
And I was in the 7th or 8th grade. It would have been like 91, 92, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, wow, this is really cool. But at some point when I think we were in high school, there was a book that came out called Tales of the Mos Eisley Cantina.
Yeah.
And
100%.
that was the first time I started to think there's like, which we didn't have the intellectual know how to call it this, but I
Sure.
kind of realized there's a sandbox
Yep.
in this Star Wars universe that can be played with.
100%.
And we did that the way that we could do that growing up in Eastern Kentucky by using, a role playing game, and that you could create these characters and that you could have this base universe that feels like Star Wars, and that
Sure.
is Star Wars. But it's a galaxy where there's all these things going on, and all these different stories to tell. So that was kind of like, a light bulb that there could be Star Wars stories without Han Solo and Luke Skywalker and Leia
Sure.
and all that kind of stuff.
It's funny because the first role playing game I ever played my whole life was the Star Wars game, and I remember going to I had a friend, Dustin Howard, no relation,
Yep.
but Dustin Howard took me to his youth group, or his Boy Scout troop or something. Like I was standing online with him one night, and I went somewhere, and then he had a friend there who was reading that Timothy Zahn Heir of the Empire book, and I remember having this realization of like, holy crap, there's more Star Wars. And he's
Yeah.
like, yeah, dude, these new books are out, and it just completely exploded my brain. And he had the Heir of the Empire RPG source book.
Oh,
And I was like, what is this magical thing? He said, it's a Star Wars game and you can play it. And
yeah.
I sat down to play for the first time, and he said, okay, now you have to create a character. And I said, great, I'll be Luke Skywalker. He's like, no. Like, that's not, like, you need to make a character. And I said, okay, Luke Skywalker. And he's like, no, you can't be Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker is Luke Skywalker. I said, okay, well, I'll be Han Solo. He was like, no, you're completely not getting it. You have to create somebody new.
Yeah.
And I remember there was this realization that hit me of like, oh, so I have to create somebody new in this universe and have completely different stories than what took place in the films. And that's when I got hooked. I'm like, wow, I don't have to wait for George Lucas to make any more movies. I don't
Right.
have to wait for anybody to write any more books. Like these are our Star Wars stories that we can
Yes.
tell.
Yep.
And as a storyteller, one of my early lessons was how much story world is important, because and I didn't really realize this until I ran the game as a game master, right? As Dungeons Dragons, you call it a dungeon master, but it's the person that basically, sort of the writer director of the role playing game. And uh, and I didn't realize the importance of story world until I had a game, I designed a story, and I remember you guys landed on a planet, and I needed you to walk down the street and turn right into a cantina, because that's where the jumping off point would be for the story. And I remember you guys walking down the street and not going in the cantina. You're like, we don't want to turn right to go in the cantina. We want to turn left.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh crap, I haven't thought about what is left.
Yeah.
Like what's over there. And so it forced me into this thought process of having to sort of build out something greater than even that of the individual story, because I never knew where the story was going to go.
Right.
And it was just wildly frustrating trying to force you guys into situations. Part of the most painful memories that I have as being a game master uh was killing your beloved character. And
Yep.
so to set this up for everybody, Ffej had an Ithorian, uh,
Yes.
was an Ithorian bounty hunter, I think.
No,
Was if I remember.
he was a no, he was a smuggler, but he was a Jedi. Well, he was force sensitive. He wasn't really a
That's it. Yeah,
Jedi, but
force
yeah,
sensitive Ithorian,
yep,
right? And
yeah,
like the for the non Star Wars fans, Ithorians are like these weird like hammerhead sharks
yeah.
type of aliens in the Star Wars universe, and so Fedge had beautifully crafted this character that you invested hundreds of hours into, right, of like
True.
developing, because
Yeah,
you gotta add to your skill sets, and after every game you're rewarded with certain points that you can improve your characters, right, and so you actually were able to hold on to a character for a long time, and every time you
yep.
jump into a game you would have this character that you would bring with you. And I was running a game, and uh God, I can't even think about it. It's awful. It's uncomfortable. But I remember that the thing that Ithorians in the Star Wars universe, they're very connected to plant life. They're very connected to especially their planet, and that is sort of part of their sort of symbiont psychology as an alien, and and somehow, Fedge, you had the worst roll in the history of dice. I
Did yeah.
think like in the history of the human race, no one has ever
Well,
rolled that poorly.
you had crippled me too before that because we were fighting a. So again,
Psychotic Jedi, right?
we were fighting a dark Jedi that you named Ed Barker for
Yep.
reasons we won't go into here. But
Right.
Ed had was constantly giving me visions of
Yep.
my home planet of Ithor in ruins and burning and
Yeah.
flint and screaming. So I was rolling at a disadvantage anyway. So then
Yeah.
you had your character over the time you earned force points. And
Yep.
if you spent a force point, you could double your dice. So I had 5 force points at that point. So I had to roll 3 dice or whatever it originally was.
Yep.
And I spent all of my force points at one time. Otherwise,
Yep.
I knew I was going to die. And then not only did I roll like almost mostly ones and failed the roll, I also catastrophically failed the roll. And in the Star Wars tables, there was a, I can't remember if they call it the luck die. That's what we always
Yeah.
call it. But if you roll a 1, something really bad happens. If you roll a 6, nothing really happens. And of course, I rolled a 1. So my Arthurian Jedi, racked with the last images he saw in his brain as he was cut down by Ed Barker's lightsaber, was his home planet. It just engulfed in flames.
Yeah, it just made you go
with
insane.
emotion. Yeah, he just clumsily like cut his own eye stalk off with his lightsaber, and then Ed Barker just finished it off. So.
And you died, and I remember that situation, and as a game master, you don't want to kill anybody. You don't want to kill any, like, especially a character like that. But at the same time, there are rules, and you were so far beyond even the role was so terrible. There was no way to like justify any other outcome, and now the story, for the story purposes, the death of Fedge Filtar, which is the name of the character, was tragic and meaningful. But to you, that actually hurt.
Oh, it ticked me off. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
Because
don't
I
think
mean, you
I don't
got
think
a
you ever
character.
recover.
Yeah, you've got a character that you've invested. I don't. I think it's been out long enough that we can talk about Game of Thrones spoilers.
Yeah, I think so.
But I wasn't.
Sure.
I didn't watch a ton. I watched the first 2 seasons of Game of Thrones, I think. But I really liked the Sean Bean character in the first season.
Sure.
And then you spend your whole first season, and he's really kind of the main character in the first season. And you think this show is about this character, this guy that's the king of the North or whatever.
Yep.
And then he dies at the end of the first season, and you're like, oh, like I just spent 8 of these 2-hour long episodes.
Sure.
investing in this character, and then he's just like his head is on a pike next to George Bush or what, I can't remember what the thing was back then. But it was just, it felt like that. Like you've invested all this time and all this stuff into this character, and you're like, oh, that's my favorite character. That's, you know, and then he's dead because you can't roll more than he rolls 6 ones for the first time. You know, got a Yahtzee with ones basically.
And you never invested the same in any other character moving forward.
Not in Star Wars. No.
Like not in Star Wars, right? Like we would always play, but you would always just kind of come up with the character. I'm going to have a Quakium monkey lizard bounty hunter, and like, you know, and it would just like, and we would have a fun adventure, and you didn't care whether that character died at the end or not, because the next time around you just make somebody new, right? And it's like you were burned in a relationship and never wanted to commit again.
It was. Right? I'm surprised we're still talking, to be honest.
I know, like I looking back, I'm like, man, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. But like it, but yeah, God, it was just such a bad role. Like, you know, it's just
it made, you know, my regret from back then is that we did not keep some sort of journals.
Yes.
You know,
you're 100% right.
Yeah, because I think you know, whether or not they played for Star Wars or we had created our own sci-fi universe or whatever, just the stories that we came up with, that we told, were, you know, maybe the world would think they're awful and full of lunacy, but I think they would have played well.
It was just, it was, you know, such a great time, and such a great, like, my Star Wars education, you know, went from just the knowledge of what we had in the movies to now I know so much more about Star Wars, because now you get into sort of the, you know, the specs of an X-Wing fighter. You get into sort of the detailed history and the mythology of different planets and races of aliens. And it was really interesting. It's like what happens when, you know, you generally play, you watch football, but then when you start playing Madden and fantasy football, that football IQ increases, right? You start to know a little bit more about the game. The Star Wars RPG really did that for me, for that Star Wars universe. And you know, then we get into the sort of the re-release, when they re-released the original trilogy. Then they had the prequel trilogy drop, you know, which was wild, right? But now we're in thoughts. But now we're into this, I think this golden age of Star Wars, now that Disney has had the property, and you know, we're 6-7 years into Disney having this thing, and we're just coming off the heels of The Mandalorian. I honestly, when The Mandalorian had the finale, I wanted to record the show the next day, but I wanted to ultimately give people some time before, you know, to watch it, so we wouldn't be spoilery with it. But I feel like now we're past Christmas, and I'm comfortable being able to talk about The Mandalorian now. But man, what a time to be a Star Wars fan! Like the 14-year-old versions of Houston and Ffej would be freaking out right now.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So
it's what's your favorite Star Wars thing going on right now?
My favorite Star Wars thing going on right now is the hope. The hope that, because I don't want to sit here and spend all this time trashing the 3 new ones, because they're not awful.
They're not awful.
They're not. And I think I'm not one of these people that hates The Last Jedi. I think that the reason people don't like The Last Jedi is that I think building story worlds is amazing and important. But when you have your main storytelling device or those movies, that's what the masses is going to see. And you take the story of Luke Skywalker going from hopeful young Jedi Knight at the end of Return of the Jedi, and the next time he shows up for the mass audience is as a grumpy old hermit milking walruses on an alien planet. Like, you missed an opportunity there to educate your audience and take them on that. They want to go on that journey with Luke to how he got to that point. And they didn't do that. And because of that, it just soured people. But now you think of the end of The Mandalorian, when the X-Wing shows up and Luke cuts through all the dark troopers and shows up. If they would have done that at the end of The Last Jedi, and he would have sacrificed himself physically and present in that moment, rather than astral projected himself there, and given just enough time for Leia and Rey and Poe and whoever else was on the Millennium Falcon to escape, I think people would think about that movie totally differently. I
What's
think they would.
interesting. What's interesting is, I'm constantly derided as somebody who when it comes to Star Wars, people always say, Houston, you like everything, and because and I think it's because I still look at Star Wars like that 14-year-old kid did, and like just like it's Star Wars, I love it.
Yeah.
Now as a professional, do I love all the decisions made? No, not necessarily. Of course, right? Like, and as a professional, I now try to think about like, okay, could I have done it better? Probably not. But maybe, I don't know. Sometimes, but I really still look at Star Wars from that 14-year-old perspective, and with the new sequel trilogy, um, the filmmaking is just so much better. The if I don't appreciate anything that Disney's done with the new trilogy, other than just the filmmaking, the action, the dialogue. I mean, honestly, George Lucas. I love George Lucas. He's one of the top 5 visionaries, I think, on planet Earth in my list of visionaries of Walt Disney, George Lucas, Steve Jobs, sort of a list that I make. Like George Lucas is amazing. He's the only person on the planet that could turn Natalie Portman, Ewan McGregor, Liam Neeson into bad actors. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, like you
Yeah.
go back and watch some of the prequel trilogy, just how stilted the directing was, and the writing was so wooden, and I hate
Yeah. Oh
sand
gosh.
like that, like
Yeah.
and it's not Hayden Christensen's fault. It's like like it. It's incredible because if you watch Natalie Portman in Black Swan and then you watch Natalie Portman in Attack of the Clones, it's like, what happened? Like, how
Yeah.
did you do that to this poor girl? And but now when I get into the Force Awakens and the Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker, it feels like a movie, and
Yeah.
it feels like a real movie with like real dialogue and real actors, and so I appreciate that. I think I also appreciate Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver. Like, I think are the 2 best actors that Star Wars has seen. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Harrison Ford is obviously tremendous. I'd put him in that list too. But I think you get Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley that are just so good, and they play it so well, and so emotional. I thought that was good, and I feel like the new sequel trilogy gave us Star Wars moments.
Okay, that was what I was going to say. Is that
The moments
all
that
3 of those movies are excellent filmmaking. They're not
yes,
Star Wars all the time. Enough.
yeah, enough, right?
Yeah.
But there's
There
but
are
there's
there are
there's
there are
pockets.
moments. Yeah, there's pockets of it. There are moments in all 3 of them that feel like Star Wars, and then there's moments in all 3 of them that feel like you tried to create and force a Star Wars moment where they're
Sure.
Lando Calrissian showing up in what was the
Rise of
last
Skywalker. Rise of
Rise of
Skywalker. Yeah.
Skywalker randomly on this planet at a festival is you trying to force Star Wars,
Sure.
a Star Wars moment where no Star Wars moment needed to be,
Sure. No, I
Um,
agree.
and,
I agree.
and like in the Last Jedi, my biggest complaint with Last Jedi wasn't the Luke stuff. Like
Yeah.
I got it, like, but you and I are consumers of Star Wars
Sure.
content all the time.
Yep.
Most people aren't. Most people are just going to see the movies. So
Right.
that's why I think telling that Luke Skywalker story was more
Mhm.
important than what they kind of did with it. But the Canto Bight stuff with
Yeah.
what I can't remember,
Finn and Rose.
Finn, and yeah,
Yeah.
was just. I mean, it's trying to create this cutesy Star Wars thing with running like that's what George Lucas did to screw up the prequels. Like I
Sure.
don't understand why they were putting that, and it was just unnecessary. It really didn't have anything to do, with the film. And then they closed that film with a little kid, and who
Yeah.
Force brings the broom to him,
Yeah.
and then you
Sure.
never see that little kid again. So you played
Sure.
up this huge moment that it's going to matter at some point in the series, and it doesn't.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's interesting because I think ultimately, if I were to create a criticism for Star Wars under the Disney banner, it's that Kathleen Kennedy, who runs Lucasfilm, she's very much an old school producer's producer, and she likes to give filmmakers sort of the leeway and the wiggle room to be able to make the film they want to make, because she's an old school movie producer,
right.
and she's very much a filmmaker's producer.
Yeah.
And like, there's some coaches that are players coaches, and there's other coaches that are more about the system. She's like a players coach, and she's going to design the system around the players rather than vice versa. And I feel like she was like, hey, JJ, you make the movies you want to make. And Ryan Johnson, you make the movie you want to make. And the Lego blocks didn't fit together super well. And now, that being said, Kathleen Kennedy also produced Rogue One, which I thought was tremendous.
It's great.
And I thought that really did still feel like Star Wars.
And the Han Solo movie is criminally underrated. It is
100%.
It's a great movie, and it's Han Solo.
It feels like Star Wars.
It does.
100%. Like, I think that's great. And she's done The Mandalorian too. She produced The Mandalorian. She produced the new Star Wars Lego holiday special. Have you seen that?
I have. It's just funny moments. So
I was pleasantly surprised by that.
Certainly better than the last Star Wars holiday.
Better than the last one, 100%. So, but here's my, like, the moments as a Star Wars fan that I geeked out in. That I just felt were so emotional in the sequel trilogy. I really thought they played up. The Kylo Ren, Daisy Ridley. Lightsaber battle in The Force Awakens, I thought was really good. That first time you see the Millennium Falcon like sort of shoot up out of that canyon, just like, holy crap, that's amazing. Little things like, even just seeing a stormtrooper take his helmet off, I thought was like, as a Star Wars fan, I was like, whoa, that's super cool, because that's something we haven't seen before. I appreciated those moments. I even appreciated, Han Solo dying. I thought that was a really emotional moment. That Harrison Ford played really well. Adam Driver the same. For The Last Jedi, I think The Last Jedi is a masterpiece. Personally, not that I loved everything about it. I did not love the Canto Bight scene. I thought that Luke Skywalker overplayed the role to be too grumpy. I feel like Ryan Johnson should have pulled him back a little bit from that. I don't think it's Mark Hamill's fault. I think the director needs to pull him back a little bit. Like, hey, don't be quite so grouchy, right? You don't have to, but I loved like the moments of that Star Cruiser, going into hyperspeed and ripping that other ship apart. I thought that was like a tremendous scene. I thought that the throne room scene where Rey and Kylo Ren take out all the Snoke's Imperial guards. That is something, and the reason I love that scene is I felt like that was a scene in one of our old role-playing games. Like, we would have played that out.
Yeah.
Right. Like, we would have had that scene. I thought it was just like tremendous and cool. I thought that the swerve at the end with Luke, like being a Force ghost, or not a Force ghost, but sort of projecting himself into that. I thought that was interesting. And like, I think that's one of for me, the thing I loved the most about Last Jedi was it surprised me. And it's hard to surprise me. And at this point in our Star Wars tenure, it's hard to surprise us with the Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
Like when he wasn't there, that legitimately surprised me.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that.
Yeah. Because we didn't get to experience Luke's journey from, Jedi Knight at the end of Return of the Jedi to jilted, angry uncle.
Sure.
Like, we didn't get to experience that journey with him, except for a few flashback scenes. Yeah. So I think it's hard for people to emotionally go there, because the last person they saw was the Luke Skywalker, who would not have force projected himself into that situation, because he would have went to save his sister. He would have went to save it. That's what he does in Empire Strikes Back.
Sure.
He leaves Dagobah before he's supposed to, That's the Luke Skywalker that the people who watch the movies remember. And that's the Luke Skywalker that they expect to see. And then they get this other one. And I think it just left a sour taste on everybody's palate. Now, I didn't have as big a problem with it as other people. I understand why people don't like it and didn't like it, because you didn't get, if Luke is going to go out, then I think a lot of people, you go look at the Marvel movies. Everybody is waiting for that moment in the second, Infinity War, for all of the heroes to come back.
Yeah.
And, I would argue that in the last 25 years, there's no moment of a movie that has packed more emotional punch than when Captain America picks up 100% Mjolnir Like
100% right.
that, I've seen all these Star Wars movies the weekend they come out, and went and saw, and that Infinity War movie when it came out. Usually I would wait a couple weeks, but I really wanted to see that one. I've not been in a theater where people hung on every word and laughed and cried and applauded and clapped. They just don't do that much around
Yeah,
here. Then that emotional roller coaster that went on in that movie, and I think they had a chance to have had that in The
sure.
Last Jedi for Star Wars, which would have come out before,
Yeah,
Infinity War.
yeah.
And I think they missed that chance to connect with the wider audience.
Well, 100, you're 100% right, and I think that I appreciated it from a filmmaking perspective, that the surprise and all that. But going back, but listen, like people change when they get older. Like people have regrets. I
Yeah,
get it. I don't know. Maybe he didn't have enough gas in his X-wing. Like I don't like, which I feel like would have been something we'd have thrown in the game of like, okay,
yeah,
you want to go save the day? You're out of gas.
you're out of gas.
But no, but I totally get it. Like I think I wanted him to show up sort of as that video game character that just lays waste, and I think that's why people loved the end of the Mandalorian, right? The
Oh
finale of
yeah,
the Mandalorian,
yeah, yeah.
because everybody was like, that's what we wanted to
Well, and
see, right?
you mentioned Rogue One. That's an echo back to exactly what Darth Vader does
Sure,
at the end of Rogue One when he
100%,
cuts
hundred
through
percent.
all the Rebel Alliance, and here's Luke showing up all in black, cutting through all these dark troopers and stuff like that. And I think people were looking for that moment in The Last Jedi, and they didn't get it. I think you could do all the other stuff that Ryan Johnson did in Last Jedi, and people would be fine with it if they had just redone that last sequence. And
Yeah,
of those three movies, I think Force Awakens is great. I think it relies too much on the same story beats from A
sure.
New
Yeah,
Hope.
it was a
But
reboot
it's
for sure.
but it's still but J.J. Abrams is wanting it to feel like that movie feels like a Star Wars.
Yes,
I mean, it
it
really
does.
does. From Han
It does.
Solo and the Millennium Falcon and the Chewie were home and all that stuff. Like it feels like a Star Wars movie. Last Jedi, like
Didn't.
you said, some
I agree.
moments, and then the Rise of Skywalker. Also, there were some Star Wars moments, but again, it's a missed. To me, it's just a missed opportunity at the end, where at some point, Qui Gon Jinn figured out how to be a Force ghost
Yeah,
and
sure.
communicate. And it seems like if you really want to tie all the Star Wars together, then that moment that she rises up and she hears all those voices, how much more powerful would it have been if she had all those there, all
You're
those other
100% right.
Jedi's there with her?
That's the see right there. That's the point. And because going back to your point about Avengers Endgame, that scene where the portals open and all the heroes are coming through. To me, like, listen, I didn't grow up a Marvel fan. I grew up a
Yeah,
DC fan. I was all
yeah.
in Superman, like Batman. Never been a Marvel guy. I always thought Marvel was campy, uh, and so I
It
think
was when we were growing up. It was really
it was. And I didn't even get into the MCU until about halfway in, but I'm firmly entrenched in the belief that the MCU may be the greatest cinematic achievement in history. Like
bad.
honestly, like with Avengers Endgame being the greatest blockbuster ever to hit the screen.
Yeah,
So I'm like 100% bullish, and it's that scene where the portals open is, I think, the closest thing that we'll ever get to that double page comic book spread.
yeah,
Like or that sometimes they have like the 4-page spread where you
yeah,
fold
yeah,
out the pages,
yeah,
right? Like that 4-page spread, like that was what we were seeing on screen with Avengers Endgame, and that was the opportunity they had at the end of Rise of Skywalker to bring all the when she says I'm all the Jedi, and like they would have had all those Yoda and Luke and
yeah.
Mace Windu and all those old Jedi behind her as a Force ghost. That was the thing that I thought, like, that's the fan service that would have popped the crowd in wrestling terminology,
Yes,
right? Like
right. Yeah,
and that's and I think that's what everybody expected from Endgame. And listen to J.J. Abrams. It was interesting. He said they considered that, and that was their first instinct, but they thought that it would diminish the last scene where you see Leia and Luke as the Force ghost at the end with Rey when
yeah,
she's burying the lightsaber, and they
yeah,
wanted that to be a little bit like more personal and meaningful, and that if you've already seen Force ghosts here, but I'm like, man, given the two, like
yeah.
like you know put yourself in the shoes of the audience rather than like me as the filmmaker, what I think the best filmmaking thing would do. Like ultimately you have to give the audience what they want sometimes.
Yeah, when you're working, when you do what you do, which is help people create worlds and universes, and you've created a world and a universe that is a brand essentially, and that people have an emotional connection with, then you may think you as a director or a filmmaker or whatever may think you have the right to make whatever movie you want, but you really don't, because this thing that you created has become bigger than you.
Sure.
And you have to, I always go back, I'm a musician, I play drums. Every time we, play a song as a drummer, I want to serve the song. I'm not there I'm not there to be the center of the song. I'm there to serve the song. Yeah. And if you look at the Star Wars universe, you're there to serve the Star Wars universe. So back to your original question 20 minutes ago about what I like best, is that hope, because what The Mandalorian does, and what Dave Filoni, who produced, has done Clone Wars, which is amazing, and Rebels, which was awesome, and now Mandalorian, like he should be cryogenically frozen and forced to be the steward of all things Star Wars he understands this concept that he has all these. The thing that amazes me about The Mandalorian is he has all these different directors come in, and it's a different director, different writer every episode, yet it feels like cohesively one story, because he's not allowing whomever to come in and make a Mandalorian episode the way they want. He's allowing them to come over, and their fingerprints will be on that Mandalorian episode, but at the end of that episode it better feel like it was a Star Wars episode and a Mandalorian episode. And the thing that The Mandalorian gets to that has been a little missing from Star Wars is that you don't know what's going to happen next. You have some idea. We all knew that Ahsoka was going to show up in season 2 at some point, but you didn't know when, and you didn't know how. And it just brings back that even some episodes, some people are like, well, this is filler. To me, the episode where he goes and hunts the crate dragon, people were like, episode. That was just kind of a filler and just trying to. I'm like, that's awesome.
Crazy. They're crazy. They're crazy because one, I think was awesome. Two, again, keep going back to it. That would be an entire 9-hour session of role-playing game that's the exact thing we would do. One, you get to see Raylan Givens in the Star Wars universe as the Marshal, which is just tremendous in and of its own right? But it's the callback to the Boba Fett armor. But that whole adventure seems very standalone, but still very Star Warsy. And with the Mandalorian, I think again, in Favreau, I trust. Filoni, I trust at this point. Looking back on it, they should have given Favreau maybe that trilogy of films. But ultimately, I think the long form storytelling model, just TV,
is better.
TV is just. I think it's now kind of we're moving into that. That's the preferred way, because it allows you to just explore things a little bit more. It's hard to kind of land a plane in 2 hours, and I don't envy J.J. Abrams to be able to do that, and I don't envy Rian Johnson to be able to do that. And what did you think? Well, I don't think we've ever had that conversation. What did you think about Rey being a Palpatine?
That didn't bother me one way or the other. Honestly, the more inventive storytelling to me was that she was a nobody. Yeah, and that the Force doesn't. I mean, the Force doesn't. There's not an aristocracy, I guess is the right term, with the Force.
Right.
I think the Skywalkers, the story has been Anakin was this divergence in the Force, so we've created this royal line of Force users. I kind of liked that Rey. They teased there initially that Rey was just nobodies,
Sure.
But then the fact that she is Palpatine's daughter feeds back into if all of the backstory of him, feeds into the fact that he was obsessed with the fact that he was a nobody.
Yeah,
and that
sure.
He came from nothing, and that he desired to be something, which is ultimately what fuels his, his drive and his rise to be. The same way that, that's what Darth Plagueis, plays on him to get him to flip and all that stuff. The same thing that he then turns on Anakin.
Sure, 100%.
All of the stuff in the prequels, story-wise, made sense.
100%.
Yeah, execution-wise, there was just flaws,
Yeah, there was just dramatically, it just wasn't super great. Again,
I've now seen him in other movies, and I just don't think Hayden Christensen is. I don't think he's all that great an actor. I think he was the wrong choice, to play Anakin. There's a way to play Anakin and make him seem entitled, which is how he comes across in Attack of the Clones.
Sure.
Without also being a spoiled brat.
Yes.
You and I have been texting about Succession on HBO. Well, here's a show about three entitled kids. Like, all three of those kids are spoiled and entitled, and each one of those characters plays it differently, but none of them play it to the point that you want to punch them in the face.
Right.
And you wanted to. It didn't. You weren't. I was not 5 minutes into it when Anakin and Obi-Wan are in the elevator going up to the Queen Amidala's or Senator Amidala's room, and he's like, "I love her, Master," and did it. It's like I wanted to punch him. Like, you can't want me to punch a lead character in your movie.
Sure.
5 minutes into the movie, you know what I mean?
Agree.
I think given a better choice, you could even take some of the. You're right. Some of the lines that Ewan McGregor and Liam Neeson have in the first one are cringy. They're cringy lines, but I can overlook it because they're delivered well. Yes. Hayden Christensen is given very cringy lines, and
that's a good point.
Can't deliver them well.
Yeah, he doesn't elevate it. No, I agree. I mean, and even then, I still think I think if you read the episode 1 script, just the script, it's one of the worst written scripts I think in the history of Hollywood. Right? It's just terrible. But even then, I still saw episode 1 in the theater 4 or 5 times. And the lightsaber fight with Darth Maul, the Battle of the Fates, was just like such again Star Wars moment that was just like so tremendous and so cool.
And the pod race, I think the pod
race is 100%
is amazing.
100%. And then you go to the Mandalorian, and when you see Cobb Vanth, Raylan Givens, has his speeder.
If you look at he's always just going to be Raylan Givens.
Yeah, he's just Raylan Givens at this point. He has one of the engines that he has on his speeder is the same engines that Anakin's using back in the pod race. It's those little things that I think are just super cool. But for me, like, if you give me moments, if you just give me Star Wars moments, it can elevate out of sort of those picky little things. That's my big thing about with Attack of the Clones. I don't think Attack of the Clones has very many moments. I don't think it and so then you're just left with the story, which isn't super great, other than Yoda fighting Dooku and flipping around. That was cool. But even obviously Revenge of the Sith, which I think is probably the best of the three, that iconic Obi-Wan, Darth Vader or Anakin battle where he becomes Darth Vader. That was really well done. And I actually think Hayden Christensen actually played that well. And I mean, he was older, and I think he was in the character a little bit more. But ultimately, I still love the sequel trilogy because because of Star Wars. I love Rogue One. I love the sequel trilogy. I wish, in hindsight, that Kathleen Kennedy would have just told J.J. Abrams from the beginning, "You have 3 movies, plan it and work it." And I think so. What we saw was it was supposed to go from J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson to Colin Trevorrow, and you can't, unless you're doing anthology. You can't switch it like that because the Lego blocks won't fit. The thing that I think everybody has kind of gotten everybody back on the Star Wars train has been The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
And it's whether you like sequel trilogy, whether you don't like sequel trilogy, whether you liked, I played the Jedi Fallen Order video game, thought it was awesome. Other people didn't like the Battlefront games, but everybody resoundingly loves I mean, have you talked to any Star Wars fan that just hates The Mandalorian?
I think the people that most connect with it are people who just love Star Wars because it is Star Wars. And it seems like what they're trying to do incrementally throughout all of these things is go back and correct some of the things and the missteps that have been done. Sure. I mean, you don't bring in a character like Luke Skywalker if you're not going to go somewhere with that across all these properties long term.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, and the rumor is, I mean, this is the rumor mill of the internet, so who knows? But Sebastian Stan, who from the MCU, may come in as a young Luke Skywalker.
He would do great. He would be great at that.
He would be great. Yeah. But it's so interesting because one, a Western in Star Wars, having a Mandalorian that's not Boba Fett. It was an interesting take from the beginning. And I thought the first season was great. The whole, Baby Yoda swerve was tremendous. I thought the high concept was super cool. But then really the second season, this past season, is really when they kicked into some like deep cut Star Wars stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
I didn't know, like my kids went nuts when they talked about Operation Cinder. I was like, I don't
yeah.
know.
Right.
And I mean, they explained it to me, and it's cool. But like, I didn't need to know what Operation Cinder was to know that was a cool moment.
Right. Right.
How great Bill Burr, who's like one of my favorite comedians. I would have never thought.
Who would have thought Bill Burr would have been great in Star Wars? Like,
but he's
really
great. I hate they just left him on that planet. I'm like, I need more of that guy. So hopefully he'll come back somewhere along the way. And that's the other thing is, again, Star Wars. They took the Mandalorian and then they built a world within a world.
Yes.
Where he has these allies and these friends, and now you're interested in what Cara Dune is gonna do as a New Republic Marshal, which they have that they announced called Rangers of the Republic or whatever. So they did a good job of seeding, those other things, those other offshoots, and I think they showed that you can make a Star Wars show feel like Star Wars, and you don't have to rely on Luke, Han, Leia. I mean, Mandalorian would have been good if Luke hadn't shown up. If Ahsoka had changed her mind and she had been the one to show up, everybody would have been cool with that.
100%.
And everybody would have been excited. Now, not as excited as Luke Skywalker showing up, obviously, but they still would have been fine, and they still would have been happy, and they still would have been cool with that. Or if it would have been some, who knows who else is out there? Mace Windu's still alive.
Right.
If Windu would have showed up, that would have been like, oh, he survived.
That would have been awesome.
That would have been, there are all kinds of different things they could have done with that, and it all would have been great.
I agree.
And so having Luke Skywalker show up is epic, but the other stuff would have been great as well.
100%. And I think that, for me, I love the Ahsoka stuff. I love all the, the stuff they're setting up with Bo-Katan and all the Mandalore stuff. I got a little concerned that they were going to get too deep cut Star Wars and start alienating some casual fans, because man, they were really pulling on those Clone Wars cartoons. Like as soon as the guy pulls out the Darksaber at the end of the first season, I thought, I don't know if that's going to work, because like that's deep cut Star Wars. And so like, my wife, Courtney, even my little girl, some of my friends that are watching it that are more casual, I'm thinking we're going to lose them. We're just going to lose them. But it seems to be the right depth to now make people want to go check out the Clone Wars cartoons and see what's going on. If you
like Melissa's, she's like, I kind of thought that at first, but then she's like, wow, a black lightsaber. I've never seen anybody have a black, and it has a different kind of blade on it. And it's like now she's, she doesn't care enough to go back and watch and learn the history of the Darksaber, but she's now aware. And then in this season, when they explain what the Darksaber's tie to Mandalore is and the clans and all that other stuff, it just adds depth to her without her having to go back and watch Clone Wars to get all that, or Rebels.
Yeah, I went back. I went back and kind of refreshed myself on the 5 or 6 episodes in the Clone Wars to deal with it, and then which I forgot that Jon Favreau voiced one of those Mandalorian characters, sort of the main Mandalorian character.
I didn't even know that. So
so the he was the voice of Tar Vizsla, I think, if you go back and watch it. He's and so he was already in that Mandalorian sort of mindset, obviously, way ahead of the Mandalorian itself, and so he gets the Darksaber, all that stuff. But if people have never seen Transmedia take place before their eyes, what they're doing is really incredible. I mean, from taking the way they're calling back to the Clone Wars cartoons, the way they're calling back to the Star Wars Rebels cartoons, which I loved. I thought they were really great. The way they're calling back to the Return of the Jedi, the way they're calling back, even it's even setting up and how it kind of links into the new movies, I think is going to be really interesting, because ultimately, at the end of the day, my first thought after the finale was, wait a minute, does this mean that Kylo Ren murders Grogu?
Yeah.
Right? Like it
So
because
my sons and I were like, how sad would it be that Grogu would either have survived two holocausts essentially in the Jedi Temple, and then
right?
again Luke's Jedi thing, or not survived? I guess the second one we don't know. So,
Sure.
but yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, it's just, so it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that, right? But I thought that that the Boba Fett stuff though, Fej, like
Oh
for
yeah,
me, like the Boba, I've never been a fan of Boba Fett.
yeah,
Like I thought Boba Fett was always like his armor was cool, but
yeah,
ultimately, I always thought Boba Fett was overhyped. I thought he was like, like the Leangelo Ball, like the middle ball, son. I felt like there was a lot of hype, not a lot there because he has three lines over three movies. He's in there less than 10 minutes. He dies in a really stupid way and never does anything really super cool.
yeah,
And I was like, I don't understand why everybody's like so crazy about Boba Fett, other than the fact that he had that cool armor. Now, 100%, Leangelo has now like risen to be an NBA All-Star. I feel like now Boba Fett, holy crap, is he cool? Like he's awesome.
yeah,
I love like the Robert Rodriguez episode where he just like takes out all those stormtroopers in the
yeah,
desert.
yeah,
Tremendous.
yeah. I wonder going forward. I like that they work the fact that he's a clone
Yeah,
into the into the story, and that we learned a little more about Django that we didn't know, that
sure.
he also was a foundling who'd been taken in by the Mandalores. And there's a whole lot. There's probably no society planet that Star Wars has explored more mythos of
Right.
in outside of the movies than Mandalore and the Mandalorians, because people are
Sure.
into them and people love them and all that stuff. So I think also there's, you talk about filmmaking and really good acting in that next to last episode. When Din takes off his helmet to do the scan and then has
Yeah.
to sit at the table
Mm,
um, with the guy. If you watch that scene, like when he looks around, like he moves his whole body even though his helmet's off.
sure.
Like that's deep. Like that is understand. I don't know if that's the director at that point.
Yeah.
Like, now this guy's lived his whole life in a helmet and has no
Right.
peripheral vision. So when the
Sure.
helmet's off, like, or if that's Pedro Pascal just is that good of an actor. Not
Right.
Was not given much to work with in Wonder Woman, so I'll
Sure.
forgive him of that. But
Right.
you've seen him in
Right.
Narcos; he's incredible in Narcos. But just those little things, like, not everybody's going to catch that, or not
Sure.
everybody's going to see that. But so that when he does take his helmet off again, there at the end, and shows Grogu his face, and Grogu touches his face. It's just a really, really good storytelling, and that feels like Star Wars. That
100%.
feels like that there's 10 minutes of intense laser blast and lightsabers, and oh no, are they going to make it? And then there's 3 minutes of just emotional punch.
100%.
That's what Star Wars is.
And I love the symmetry of Star Wars, where and I George Lucas always had this philosophy of rhyming poetry, and I felt that the symmetry, one, like you said, with Luke coming back in, taking out those dark troopers the way his father did, took out the Rebel Alliance at the end of Rogue One, at the beginning of A New Hope, was super cool. I think that was obviously intentional, but then the moment where Din takes off the helmet and Grogu sees his face is such an interesting symmetry to when Luke takes off Anakin's helmet.
His helmet, yeah,
Uh, and let me see you with my own eyes, sort of a
right,
thing. And one, it's emotional even by itself, but then when you see that symmetry, really, this is our mythology, like our Greek mythology, that I think will live on hundreds of years from now. Like this is the stuff that's playing out, and I think it's just really super interesting. But I think the thing that I've been considering now, that is such an interesting theme, and I think maybe I'm maybe picking up on it just on the stage of life that I'm in. But this interesting theme of fatherhood in the Star Wars universe is is like nobody has good dads. There's not really good dads in the Star Wars universe, right? Like, it's I think that part of why Anakin gets off track so much is, one, he didn't have a dad. Like he was being raised by a single mom. Then he gets adopted by Qui-Gon and sees Qui-Gon as that father figure, only for that father figure to be murdered, right? Then he wants, I think, Obi-Wan to sit in that role. Obi-Wan isn't a father figure to him, more like a brother, big brother, right?
Yeah, he's a big brother, not a father figure.
And so he grows up, without this. Then there's all this pressure on Anakin to take care of Padme, and like, but he doesn't know how to be a husband, doesn't know how to be a father. But there, if you look at Rogue One, if you look at if you look at even the Mandalorian with the child and Mando, like there's always this refrain of like the importance of like having a good dad in your life.
Yeah.
Like, is that just because I'm a dad now that I see that? Like, or
probably.
Do you think that you think George is like, or like, sort of working that out through the?
I would say I don't know what his. I've never read a George Lucas biography or anything like that, but you certainly see that play out in the original trilogy. I mean, it really is the story of a father and a son. I mean, that's ultimately what the story is. And then you go back and watch the prequels. It really is the story of it's a father and son story. And in this case, like you said, Anakin doesn't have a father, and in his quest to be the kind of father that he never had, he ends up, screwing it all up and destroying it. Right. I think it's funny you say that as a pastor. I hear all the time people are like, we need to be a biblical family. Well, if you've ever actually read the Bible, there's no good families in the Bible.
No good families.
They're all really screwed up. There's no good, So I just always laugh when people say that. So I think there is some sort of intrinsic inhuman, whether it is, I believe that relationship between God the Father and us, that he wants us to rely on him and that he is the good father. And then we look for all these other fathers and validations everywhere we can't ultimately get them because they'll fail us. I think that you see that, played out across the Star Wars galaxy. And again, from the religious standpoint, the thing that I kind of liked over the course of the 2 seasons of The Mandalorian is, we in Christianity, especially in this country, our battle is against, to me, has become against Christian fundamentalism. And you see Jin start to understand that these rigid fundamental beliefs that he's had don't actually apply.
That's super interesting
in the real world, and they rip that humanity away. And I see this all the time in the church world, where we have fundamentals this or fundamental that, and people become so rigid and they become so standard that they lose their humanity and their ability to love people who are far from them and actually be God, actually represent love to people when they have built up these walls. And I think to watch Jin wrestle with that, especially through the second season,
super interesting.
Yeah, I think Bo-Katan and Sasha Banks, I don't know what her character's name is.
Right.
I just know it's played by Sasha. To see them take off their helmets and him be upset, but then he see them have honor, and they honor the deal that they made with him and those sorts of things. And then, it's Bill Burr's character that says as they're traveling in that thing, that, everybody's got these standards until, your life is on the line, or I can't remember exactly how he phrases it, but they kind of foreshadowed what was going to happen. With that at the end. I think that is another important chiseling away, that now he's got the Darksaber. Din is the leader of Mandalore.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
And he even realizes how idiotic that is because he just keeps trying to give it back.
Which again, I feel like that's something that we would have done in the role playing game.
It is.
Like if you would have had a character like, I don't want this. I don't want this.
Yeah. And he doesn't want it. And he's realizing, I think he realizes in that moment when Moff Tarkin and he realizes Bo-Katan is being so rigid about this, I don't want to do this, just take it back. I think he's realizing how silly that these things that he's been raised. I think he's appreciative that these people brought him in, that they raised him, they took care of him. But I think he's realizing that these rigid standards that they've tried to apply to him over the years they have to be more fluid and more flexible,
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting parallel. Like he's like a guy that a kid who's grown up in sort of a religiously
Oh,
fundamental
yeah,
household, and then
yep.
goes to college, and there's like this realization of like, wait a minute,
Yeah, yeah. He's homeschooled.
wow,
He's been
like
homeschooled his whole life. Yep,
right, like I'm actually, I grew up in a cult,
yep.
right? Like I feel like that's what the whole, like, this is the way, all that stuff is super cool, but there is this realization that I think is starting to have of like, wait a minute, I'm in a cult. And then you go back and you watch those Star Wars cartoons, the Clone Wars, and you see the Death Watch, right?
Yeah.
And you start to get some of that history of the separation between the Death Watch and sort of the rest of Mandalore, and it's just really really interesting. So Kathleen Kennedy just debuted 10 new Star
Yeah.
Wars shows, which is absolutely crazy. As a Star Wars fan, what's we have the new Ahsoka show, we have the Obi-Wan Kenobi limited series, we have the Rangers of the New Republic, the new Boba Fett show that was teased at the post-credit scene, the Mandalorian, the Book of Boba Fett. We have a Patty Jenkins Top Gun in space, Rogue Squadron movie, which is going to be crazy. Taika Waititi, who did Thor Ragnarok and Jojo Rabbit, one of my favorite writer directors out there, is doing a Star Wars movie. Kevin Feige, who's sort of that mastermind over the MCU, has his own Star Wars movie. What are you most looking forward to?
I think I'm most looking forward to Ahsoka,
Yeah,
because she of the expanded universe that no longer exists characters, which I don't remember when I stopped reading the books, but I always really liked Mara Jade, and they've not brought her back into
she's
any
great.
of and the other character that I love that was in the expanded universe that we know existed in this universe because there's a statue of him, is gosh, where did his name go? Darth uh, uh it's going to drive me crazy. Darth Bane.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, who? If you read those books, they're my favorite outside of the first three Timothy Zahn books, the Darth Bane books that came out, gosh, 15, 16 years ago.
Sure.
Like, they're great. Like, if you
Yeah.
want to read something about the Sith and where the rule of two comes from and all that stuff, like, they're great. We know he existed because there's a statue of him on the Sith planet when Ray goes into
Oh, that's
with his
interesting.
crazy. He has crazy organic armor and stuff. So they're not there, but Ahsoka, ever since Clone Wars originally aired, I've loved Ahsoka. I just think she's a cool character, and she's spunky. She's like the female Peter Parker of the Star Wars universe. Like, that's just kind of the way I thought of her. And I watched Clone Wars. I watched all of Rebels. That's something that, speaking of being a father, my sons and I love to watch together.
Yeah,
So, like, I love Thrawn. So I feel like where you're going to get Thrawn is in the Ahsoka
I agree.
stuff, and where I miss, and I liked Edger. I like to see, and Edger and Thrawn disappeared together. And clearly that's who Ahsoka is looking for, because she's thinking, if I can find Thrawn, I can find what happened to Ezra. I said Ezra Bridger. So that's the one I'm most looking forward to. I think with all things, one of the things that Marvel has done that's smart, I think, and part of this may just be pandemic year or whatever, is I feel like we've all got a breather. Marvel stuff to rebuild. Like, so the thing that I do worry about Star Wars is that we're going to oversaturate that, the entertainment market. It's hard. Right now the only thing going on is the Mandalorian. So it's really easy to have all your energy, all your focus, and make something great. But then you're going to take something great and you're going to divide it by 10. You can only spin so many plates, at one time. So I think that's a little bit what happened with Marvel with the TV shows. I think Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was okay the first couple of seasons, but I think it just got to be too much. I think the Inhumans or whatever it was wasn't any good. There was just, had so much focus and energy and power devoted to those cinematic movies that they tried to offshoot stuff on the small screen, and it just didn't work long haul because they couldn't give the attention to it because they were given all their attention and focus over there. So that's my concern about Star Wars. So Ahsoka is definitely the one that I'm looking for. And the Boba Fett, I think what you said, I always have liked Boba Fett. I'm not like a fanboy or anything, but I always thought he was a cool character. So I like to see what they do with that. And I like that they gave him a sidekick who, she plays a good villain. She's a really good villain on the Star Trek show on CBS, whatever the new one. I can't think of what
Discovery
it's called.
or
Yeah, but she comes back. She dies as a hero, but then she, in an alternate reality, she's a bad guy. I don't know, but she plays a good bad guy.
Sure.
So I look forward to that. But Ahsoka mostly just because I really dig that character and the characters that I know are in her orbit that we're going to see more of.
I think Taika Waititi's movie I'm eager to see because he's just such a Thor Ragnarok. I think is just like one of my favorite MCU movies.
Yes,
I think it's just tremendous. He's just such a funny dude, and I liked his Mandalorian episodes. He directed a couple episodes of that as well. But he played IG-11, the voice of IG-11. But I think I'm looking forward to that Kenobi show. Seeing Ewan McGregor kind of get back in the saddle, I think is going to be interesting. Bringing Hayden Christensen back as Darth Vader is going to be really interesting.
I don't know, man.
I don't know. I'm not sure how it's going to work, but the continuity is interesting, and here's why. Because I think there's one line because usually this is. My first instinct was they can't have Darth Vader back in there because it seems like in A New Hope, Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi hadn't seen each other like basically since the Mustafar, right? Since the Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
And but there's a line in Return of the Jedi that always stuck out to me is when Luke Skywalker gives himself up to Darth Vader to be arrested. Darth Vader says, and Luke's trying to get him to come back to the light side. Darth Vader says, Obi-Wan once thought as you did that I could be brought back, right? But he was wrong.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was interesting because at what point did Obi-Wan try to pull him back to the light side?
Yeah.
If he hadn't seen him since he dropped him in the lava in Mustafar.
Yeah.
He sees him in New Hope. When did he try to get him back because he thought he could be redeemed? And I always felt that was.
I thought that was kind of like during their fight, like his lightsaber fight. He's talking to him the whole time, trying to get him to. And then when he refused to see, I have the high ground, and then he goes, "Well, there's no hope for you."
Sure.
So I guess that's what I thought there. But you could be right. I mean, that could be interesting. There's some characters that I just think you leave well enough alone.
Yeah.
And I think they brought Darth Vader back in Rebels for that one scene.
It was awesome too, by the way.
Which was great, but you're in an animated sequence.
Sure.
You are not using him as a major plot device. Like again, like Rogue One, he's just showing up to do Darth Vader things.
Yes. Tremendous. Yeah.
Tremendous. I just worry that now you're going to, even though it's a limited series, I worry that you're going to do something to a character that he's gone. Like, let's just leave, well enough alone. And if we're going to use him, we use him in that way where he just comes back to slice everybody up and force choke dozens,
Yeah. Right.
What you would expect Darth Vader to be doing during that time.
I don't know if you played Jedi Fallen Order, the Xbox game. But so me and my little girl, she's 6. We played through the entire game, and it's tremendous Star Wars storytelling in the Star Wars canon. Probably I haven't been a big fan of Star Wars video games since Knights of the Old Republic, basically. But sort of the modern video games, not a big fan of. Like Battlefront, I try to play Battlefront with my nephew. I die every 3 seconds. Someone shoots me. I can't. It's too frenetic and crazy. But the narrative of Jedi Fallen Order is actually really, really super interesting. But at the end, sort of that final boss that happened that you fight, Darth Vader comes out of nowhere and you have to fight Darth Vader. And we both started screaming. It was like super early on a Saturday morning. We're letting my wife sleep, and Darth Vader comes out of nowhere and you have to fight Darth Vader. And we both, it just pops the crowd. We completely mark out and go crazy and start screaming, wake my wife up. But that is, I think, like you're saying, where Darth Vader shines is those the Undertaker just pops out of nowhere and destroys everybody and then goes away for another 6 months, right? One of that sort of a character. It's going to be interesting to see how they use them, though. I'm interested to kind of see how they pull it off. But Grand Admiral Thrawn, I think Benedict Cumberbatch, hopefully I'm jockeying for him. I'm intercessing for Benedict Cumberbatch to be Grand Admiral Thrawn. I think he's going to be a good one. The casting is going to be super important with that. But yeah, you're right. How they dole these things out is going to be the key. They can't give it to us all at once. They need to kind of drip this stuff. But the same thing they're doing with Marvel. They announced 10 Marvel shows at the same time. So they're, I don't know, but what a great time to be a fan.
Oh, yeah.
Just like, holy crap, again, 14-year-old Houston, 14-year-old Ffej would be going nuts right now. But Ffej, thank you so much. This went like super long, but I love just having super long Star Wars conversations. We just need a 2-liter bottle of Jolt Cola and some Funyuns, and then we're back to
Giovanni's Pizza. Yep.
That's it. We're back to 1995. So thank you so much, and maybe we can have a recurring Star Wars segment moving forward of the Superstore podcast. I love it. Because you just can't talk deep cut Star Wars with too many people, right? Like you just, it's